Monday evening's third and final U.S. presidential debate was never going to swing the election. Still, it featured a feisty incumbent, a challenger painting himself as a centrist on global affairs, both courting that small sliver of undecided voters. We'll see how even on foreign policy, different states have different issues over in the U.S. This Tuesday, Barack Obama started his final dash to Election Day in Florida before traveling on to Iowa, while Mitt Romney was making his way west to Nevada. All of them swing states, with the margin in the polls shrinking to naught. The forecast calls for heavy mudslinging with scattered litigation when the polls close on the 6th. Today in the France 24 debate, the final countdown to the U.S. election. With us, Caith KUSHNER and Forrest ALOGNA. They work for the same Paris law firm, but Forrest is a Democrat and Caith is a Republican. Also with us from Florida, longtime New York Times correspondent Joe TREASTER with the University of Miami School of Communications. Thank you for being with us today. Iranian attorney Ardavan AMIR-ASLANI joins us, and Anne BAGAMERY of the International Herald Tribune, the France 24 debate, where you can weigh in on the conversation, and you have on Facebook and Twitter. You can find us at François F24. Let's first begin with the Snap poll of viewers who saw Monday's debate in Florida. CNN giving it 48% for Barack Obama. CBS New York Times poll, 53% for Barack Obama and just 23% for Mitt Romney. Again, ultimately, Anne BAGAMERY, how much will this third debate matter?
Well, you pointed out in your preamble that there is a very, very small number of undecided voters left. This is an extraordinarily polarized and polarizing election, having gone negative so early on. Both campaigns have solidified their bases, which was what they intended to do, and now each campaign is trying to find the margins to play, and it's in a certain number of states that are still up in the air. Will this change anybody's mind? I doubt it. And one reason I say that is not simply because of the math that we've just discussed. It's because the real audience for this debate was an American domestic audience, and foreign affairs are not top of the list of concerns for American voters. Everybody wants a president who is presidential. Everyone wants a commander-in-chief who can command. But bottom line, this election is about domestic political issues like the economy. And you could see that in the debate. Each candidate pivoted to it whenever he could. But what really is important to know about this is that nobody is picking a presidential favorite now, nobody in America anyway, based on how they're going to conduct foreign policy in Syria, China, the Eurozone, or anywhere else.
All right, well, let's nonetheless look at some of those issues, because we're often bemoaning the fact that they don't talk about foreign policy. This is our big chance here. Now, what viewers want from debates are zingers, you know, the sentence that's going to get the most traction. This time around, it came from the mouth of Barack Obama during an argument over the size of the U.S. military.
Since FDR, we've always had the strategy of saying we could fight in two conflicts at once. Now we're changing to one conflict. Look, this, in my view, is the highest responsibility of the President of the United States, which is to maintain the safety of the American people. And I will not cut our military budget by $1 trillion, which is the combination of the budget cuts that the President has, as well as the sequestration cuts.
I think Governor Romney maybe hasn't spent enough time looking at how our military works. You mentioned the Navy, for example, and that we have fewer ships than we did in 1916. Well, Governor, we also have fewer horses and bayonets, because the nature of our military has changed. We have these things called aircraft carriers, where planes land on them. We have these ships that go underwater, nuclear submarines.
Joe TREASTER, was that for you the memorable line of the night?
I thought the chasing of each other around on Israel policy and back and forth on China was also pretty interesting. It wasn't maybe as cute and maybe didn't have that poetic turn that Obama's capable of, but there was, Israel is so important to the American vote and to U.S. relations, and they both wanted to get that just right, and then on China, it looked like Romney was being a bit aggressive in putting himself in a position where he would find it very difficult to negotiate any better trade terms. And then when Obama had his crack at the microphone, I I think Romney could see where he'd gone wrong, and he corrected right away. So it came out, pretty much a draw, I think.
Pretty much a draw. Forrest, ALOGNA, do you agree?
No, not at all. I mean, I think it was. I think Obama has hit his stride in terms of debate performance, in terms of the non-content issues that are just as important as the content. His body language was great. He had great emotional tone, very presidential, and of course a real mastery of the content that comes from real life experience.
Caith, KUSHNER?
Was it a draw? No, I don't think it was a draw, and I think that Romney won, and I'll tell you why. Obviously, this election is not going to be determined by foreign policy, but people want to know that the person at the top has the ability to oversee foreign policy, and I think Romney was able to discuss foreign policy issues man to man with the president. Regardless of some cute comment about aircraft carriers and submarines, I think he was able to articulate a vision of America as a leader in the world, which I think people do feel like we're in decline, and there are problems with the way Obama has been handling things. I think in this debate, people were able to look at Romney and say, okay, this is someone that can represent America. I think that's more important than the president pretending that Romney doesn't know what an aircraft carrier is.
Ardavan, AMIR-ASLANI, it struck a lot of people how much they agreed on things. Romney even coming around on the drawdown date from Afghanistan.
Of course. I mean, basically speaking, what comes out of the discussions that we witnessed is basically that Romney is saying exactly the same thing as the president is saying today, but as the president pointed out, louder and in a much more extravagant way. But at the end of the day, both candidates seem to be exactly on the same guidelines as far as foreign policy is concerned, at least in relation to the Middle East. They may diverge in relation to China, but on the Middle East, they're on the safe side. Even Romney...
Same side when it comes, for instance, to the issue that's dearest to your heart, Iran?
Of course. I mean, the president today is following a path of wisdom. Romney, after having had a number of excited comments about the situation after the fiasco of his trip to Israel, Poland, and the UK, somehow crawled back to a position of decency and lined himself up with that of the president. So as far as Iran is concerned, I'm sure that Iranian commentators and Iranian government officials are pretty convinced that there won't be a huge change in U.S. policy with reference to Iran.
Now, both sides doing their darndest during the debate, of course, to show their commitment to Israel. So did they feel the love over in Tel Aviv? Take a listen.
Definitely, I believe Obama is better, not only for the Israeli people, for the whole Western world. I think he's an intellectual, and he's a liberal, and he really, I think, presents for all people who are for a peaceful world.
As we can see, Romney's a better friend of Israel and a better friend of Bibi's. And I believe it will be better for Israel, and according to what we read in the newspapers and with what's happening lately, it seems like Romney's better for us.
Bibi, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister. Joe TREASTER, BAGAMERY was saying how when they talk about foreign policy, it's aimed at specific states. The issue of Israel, of course, near to all the Jewish voters that are in Florida. Is Israel really something that gets talked about a lot during the campaign in Florida?
Well, there are certain parts of Florida where it certainly is a big topic, but one of the things that occurred in this debate is that the area where we really have a strong daily connection is Latin America. And there was a lot of disappointment this morning that they hardly touched on Latin America. Romney at one point uttered the term, but they clearly were staying focused on the economy. Every chance they would get away from foreign policy and come back home. And when they did talk about foreign policy, they would talk about how it was not possible to have a strong foreign policy unless you were strong at home. It seems to me that Latin America has been marginalized in this debate just the way the environment has, something that we were watching closely. And I think both of them are just just far enough off the center that neither candidate feels he can devote much time to it.
And BAGAMERY, Latin America, of course, crucial, especially with the growing number of Hispanic voters in the United States. Did that surprise you as well?
There were plenty of things that surprised me about what didn't get talked about in this debate, and if you'd like to see a pretty good summary of that, you should take a look at the piece by Steve Erlanger on the New York Times and IHT website right now. Europe almost never came up, except when Mitt Romney said that if he wasn't elected, that the United States was going to become Greece. I mean, America has expended lots of energy and lots of very high-priced, high intellectual time on making sure that Europe doesn't disintegrate, that the Eurozone doesn't disintegrate. They send Treasury secretaries, they send undersecretaries to monitor this very closely. They've been right in the middle of the debates all the way through the role that they play in the international organizations. Not one word in this debate. And you really have to ask yourself why that is. Latin America, same thing. Other parts of Asia rather than China. I mean, Korea didn't get mentioned. An offhand comment. Africa, conspicuously absent, except in one reference to Mali. So you really do have to look at this and say, what kind of advice was anybody getting about what constitutes a full menu of foreign affairs concerns for the next president?
That was picked up on, by the way, by our good friend Dave Clark of the Washington Bureau of the French news agency AFP. He tweeted, mentions of Mali, 4, mentions of Europe, 1. It's the one you mentioned, the one about Romney comparing to Greece. Is this not a strategy on the part of both candidates? If you're talking about Europe, then you wind up talking about bad news.
It's so true. It's so true because at the end of the day, as you notice, Romney constantly tried to bring back the debate to domestic economic issues, avoiding political issues in relation to the international relation of the United States. But they mentioned on a number of occasions Mali. I mean, it's important to point that out. Why? Because the Republican candidate is constantly trying to play on the fear aspect of Islam and the Arab world, basically telling the people, if you don't vote for Romney or the Republican candidate, you're going to end up with Muslim fanatics all over the place, basically invading America and being on America's doorsteps. Using Libya as the example, pointing to that issue, which is a scandal from our European perspective, was another illustration of that attitude.
Using Egypt as an example,
exactly.
Raising this, a Muslim Brotherhood president, a democratically elected one, let's not forget. But
of course. So when you look at the problem today, you're seeing that you've got a president, the current American president, who's trying to open up a dialogue with the entire Muslim world, be it Shia or Sunni. Look, a few weeks before the upcoming American elections, President Obama, the American administration, is considering bilateral discussions with Iran. Although no date has been fixed for a meeting between these two countries, it is going on. He is trying to do whatever he can to bring back Iran into the civilized world, into a world of dialogue, and away from the nuclear issue. He's going to try to implement whatever is possible to bring peace to this world. Well, if you bring Romney out there, you look at his language. When he went to Israel, for example, the impression that one got was that the Palestinians are a bunch of retarded people and that the Israelis are successful because they're genetically much more intelligent. That's the kind of language you're getting out of Romney. Whereas the other side, on President Obama's side, is that language of openness, is the hand should open up to the other party, is that of dialogue. That's a huge difference.
Kate Kushner, your thoughts?
Well, when you speak about specific comments of Romney's, I mean, one thing you have to bear in mind is that you're talking about the media coverage of Romney and verbal slips that someone who's getting accustomed to the role of being a potential world leader makes. And, look, I'm not saying it's unfair, but it's part of the landscape that the Republican candidate is running against the Democrats, and he's also running against the media. That's just the lay of the land. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm not saying it's unfair, but that's the reality. And he gets coverage that reflects that. As far as engagement with the Muslim world, I think what Romney was saying last night was very different from, the debate I watched was very different. I got a very different impression, which was that he was saying, we want to actively engage with the Muslim world, and we want to do so in a proactive way, not in a reactive way. In a Romney administration, you wouldn't be the last world leader to say it's time for regime change in Egypt, okay? And then not have a seat at the table and not have a lot of credibility with the former opposition that's coming into power. And I think that's what he was getting at in the extended discussion of Syria as well. As far as Europe goes, you should bear in mind that, the euro I think Romney's basic critique of Obama was lack of leadership. And nobody's going to say that fixing the problems with the euro is a job for the U.S. president. Okay, I think that's a fair point, that that's not his responsibility to solve. But he did mention issues in Europe. He mentioned Obama's pulling out the missile shield facilities from Poland. Okay, that's a real issue. That shows to some people lack of leadership, and the kind of leadership that makes our allies question our commitment to them. I think that was a legitimate criticism.
Forrest?
Intervention at this point in the Middle East, and certainly during the events in Egypt over the last few years, was a very delicate balance for the United States in terms of its diplomacy. Taking sides too early or too vocally could have backfired against the United States. In the same way, in Libya, a country that has a long history of both anti-American sentiment at the leadership level, but also on a popular level. The same is true in Syria. Taking a vocal position for the United States can really have a boomerang effect. And Romney's inexperience, as Caith very eloquently points out, would be a danger for the United States and for the world in this delicate historical period that we're living through in the Middle East. There's also two other issues, I think, with Mr. Romney. First of all, we don't really know what his positions would be as a leader. He's taken a lot over the past 6 months, but we can look to two things about his character that are pretty clear. First of all, he would probably be one of the most religious presidents that the United States has ever seen. And he's got a very moral vision of the world. He's also surrounded by folks from the Bush administration. The historical reality is those are the people who he's got, and he's going to need experienced people if he's elected. So we can either go with the very pragmatic approach that President Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton have adopted in really navigating some very difficult times in a very delicate, nuanced way, or we can go back to a Bush administration, very moralistic and didactic approach to foreign policy.
All right, we're going to pick up on this point when we come back and also look ahead to what awaits 2 weeks to go until Election Day in the United States. You're watching the France 24 debate.